A senior NBC News correspondent covering national security and the Pentagon, Courtney Kube, joins us now. Courtney, when people in Portland hear the president is deploying the National Guard, it's sure to cause some unrest. What from your reporting should Portlanders expect?
Yeah, so at this point, it looks like it's upwards of 200 members of the Oregon National Guard who will be deployed. The officials here telling us that the deployment is immediate, so we may see members of the National Guard on the streets in the next hours or at least couple of days. Now, at this point, their mission is to protect federal personnel and federal property. It seems as if much of it will be focused on ICE facilities there in Portland. But the big question is what President Trump put on Truth Social over the weekend when he said that he was authorizing full force as part of this mission. At this point, officials here are not saying anything about exactly what that means and whether this could look different than other times that the National Guard has been mobilized and deployed in recent months as part of this protecting federal personnel and property, Blair.
Right, I'm curious, how has this compared to what you've seen in other cities where the president has deployed the National Guard?
So it feels like it's going to be pretty similar to what we saw in Los Angeles. Now, one big difference here is the authorities that the National Guard will have. The Oregon National Guard are going to be under Title 32. That means that while they are being paid and their benefits will come from the federal government, they'll still remain under the authority of the governor. As Title 32, they also have slightly different authorities of what they can and cannot do. So if you're on Title 10, like the National Guard and active duty Marines were in Los Angeles, they cannot conduct any kind of law enforcement missions. That's a violation of an old act known as Posse Comitatus. On Title 32, they have a little bit more authority to aid or assist in some law enforcement missions here. But again, being under the governor's authority, it will really be up to the state exactly what they will and will not be doing there.
Didn't a federal judge already rule that Trump's use of the National Guard in LA was illegal?
Well, remember, that went back and forth several times. And then we've seen what's happened here in Washington, D.C., where the National Guard have also been deployed. And in this case, while they're supposed to be here to help with law enforcement and help with reducing crime, we've seen them do things like cleaning up monuments. Just this past weekend, we saw them scrubbing some of the national monuments here in Washington, D.C. But the question is, we've already heard from the governor of Oregon saying that they don't need the National Guard deployment there. And we've already seen, frankly, the majority of the information that we got over the weekend about this came from that lawsuit filed by the state of Oregon against the Department of Defense, where I'm standing, the Department of Homeland Security, and the president about this deployment. So the big question now is, will they be able to stop this deployment? At this point, everyone here, officials talking to us here at the Pentagon, believe that the National Guard will be deployed. Again, it's just still a matter of exactly what the governor will order them to do and authorize them to do.
So I'm curious, should we expect the National Guard troops to be engaging with protesters? I know Trump has said they're going to be focused on protecting those buildings, but what do you think we should expect?
So if in fact there's protesters that are at federal facilities, we should expect to see National Guard there protecting the facilities and protecting any personnel. But they're not supposed to engage in direct law enforcement unless the rules of engagement state otherwise. Now, generally, rules of engagement, that's exactly what they're allowed to do. They're sort of their left and right limits. Those tend to be classified or at least sensitive, and we don't always know what they are. But that will be set by the governor and then the task force commander, who will say, exactly what they'll be allowed to do. Again, I would look to, as a model for this, I would look to what the Guard was doing in Los Angeles. In that case, they were specifically, in many cases, assigned to perimeter security around buildings. In some cases, they were protecting ICE officials or other federal officials when they were going on raids or just engaged in their normal daily activity, but they weren't actually doing things, for the most part, like arrests. Sometimes they would do a little bit of crowd control, but sort of the classic law enforcement things that functions that we think of, the National Guard were not doing that in LA. And I suspect at this point, that's the same thing that you should expect there in Portland, Blair.
Okay, Courtney, thank you for your reporting.